Good evening, and welcome to our Parshas webcast. This week is the portion of Pinchas, and it also coincides with the holiday of Yud Beis and Yud Gimel Tammuz, which is the 12th and the 13th of Tammuz, which marks the day when the previous Rebbe was released from his imprisonment and his exile, and that story is a fantastic story that deserves a class for itself. But just briefly, in the year 1927, the previous Rebbe was the leader of the Jewish people in Russia, as he was the leader of the whole Jewish world. But he lived in Russia at the time, and in Russia the communists, especially the Jewish communists, had an all-out war against Jewish tradition, the Jewish religion, and they tried to uproot it and outlaw it completely. And they killed, sent to prison anyone that would teach Judaism, especially if they taught Judaism to children, but any kind of Judaism. And the Rebbe, the previous Rebbe, was not going to succumb to this, and he mobilized a whole army of shluchim, of Hasidim in Russia, who were ready to literally give up their life. The story is told that he called in 9 Hasidim, and he told them that he wants to make a covenant with them. A covenant that God made with Abraham in the Torah. He made a covenant, an everlasting bond. And he told them that you're 9 and I'm the 10th. Together we form a minyan, and we should pledge that we will never give up. We will fight for Judaism to the last drop of blood. That's what he said to them. And he asked them if they're willing, and they all said yeah. And the 10 of them made an oath or of some sort, and they meant it. And I believe that the only one, if I'm not mistaken, I heard that only one out of the 9, the previous Rebbe was eventually forced out of Russia, as you will hear soon the story. But out of those 9 Hasidim, only one of them made it out. The others perished. Actually, gave up their life. Even the one that did make it out also sat in prison and was almost dead. So we're talking about not people that dedicated their life, they dedicated their time and went to uncomfortable places. We're talking about people that were ready to give up the last drop of blood for Judaism. And the previous Rebbe was at the helm of this fight and this battle, and eventually it caught up with him, and the communists, the Bolsheviks, arrested him and sentenced him to death. And it was a serious, serious imprisonment. They tortured him there. They threw him down flights of stairs, and they broke his bones. He never recovered from that. He was always sick.
How old was he at the time?
At the time he was 47 years old. But he was, after that, he was already never the same. He came to America afterwards for a long time to visit, and he went back. He moved to Poland. And then in 1940 eventually came to, he migrated to the United States and lived here for 10 years. But that event destroyed him, because it was destroyed him physically, not spiritually. He was a fire. He was a lion that stood up against the mightiest power of the world at the time, Stalin. And he won. The previous Rebbe won. He was in prison, and through some connections with the American government, they got the sentence of death turned over to a 10-year exile, sentence. And once he went to that place, he traveled there. Exile, yeah. And he went to exile. 9 days later, they informed him that he's completely released. He can come back home to Leningrad, which he did. So that happened on the 12th of Tammuz. The 12th of Tammuz happened to be in Russia a legal holiday, I believe. That's why the actual, or maybe it was Shabbos.
It was a local holiday.
I can't remember.
No, it was a local holiday.
It was a local holiday, and they couldn't actually release him that day, sign it, so they actually released him on the 13th. So the news he got on the 12th, the actual release happened on the 13th, and that's why the 12th and 13th have always become a major holiday in the Hasidic calendar and in the Jewish calendar. And we celebrate it every year, and the Rebbe used to make a Farbrengen every year on the 12th of Tammuz, major. It was one of the big Farbrengens of the year. And in the later years it was televised, it was on television. So the Parsha of Pinchas sometimes coincides with the 12th and the 13th of Tammuz. In fact, actually most of the times it does not. Most of the time the 12th and 13th of Tammuz fall in the week before, in the portion of Bolok, or Chukas and Bolok together, but not Pinchas. Pinchas happens seldom. But it's interesting that the previous Rebbe writes that he was born, the year he was born, it was also in the portion of Pinchas. He was born on the 12th of Tammuz also, by the way. That's his birthday. So imagine that. That was a nice birthday gift, 1927. He got his life back. But I shouldn't say he got his life back, because his life he had all the time. In fact, he said that they can take my body, they can inflict pain on my body, but they can never enslave my soul. So his real life he always had.
Right. Where did he go when he was released?
Kostroma.
No, from
Leningrad. From the prison, he was told to go home for a day, and he went that night. He was told to go onto a train to Kostroma, which he did. Anyway, so the Rebbe writes, the Friedrich previous Rebbe writes that in the year that he was born, it was also he was born on the 12th of Tammuz. That year also coincided with the portion of Pinchas, and he writes even more that most of the things that the major events of his life are hinted, or even more than just hinted, in the portion of Pinchas. He has there was some kind of a deep connection between the previous Rebbe and the Parsha of Pinchas, or Pinchas himself. In fact, it says that Pinchas and the name Yitzchak, which is the previous Rebbe's name, have the same numerical value. So that also is another obvious connection between the two. And Yosef, his first name, is also connected to Pinchas, because Yosef in the Bible, Pinchas was his grandson. Pinchas was a descendant of Joseph. So there's obviously something between the previous Rebbe and Pinchas. Now, what is that connection? So for that we have to know who was Pinchas. Let's talk for a minute about the story of Pinchas. Pinchas was a very interesting, he appears in the Torah once, he makes his statement, he makes his move, he makes his, and then he's not so, he becomes later a little bit, he was involved with the leadership, but he wasn't the leader of the Jewish people. What happened over here was as follows, and this we read in the end of last week's portion. When Balak, that king of Moab, summoned Bilam. Bilam was that prophet, or that necromancer, or that he had some divine abilities, and he was a man that if he would bless someone, the person was blessed. If he would curse, the person was cursed. And so Balak got scared of the Jewish people. So he called upon Bilam to come and help him out and get rid of the Jewish people through his by his mouth, by the power of his mouth, by his curse. To make the long story short, he wasn't successful. God turned every one of his curses into a blessing, and he ended up blessing the Jewish people instead. When he saw that he was not successful, he gives Balak the following advice. He tells him like this: God, the Jewish God, the God of the Jewish people, despises promiscuity. Despises it very much. If you can get them, what happened was like this: God, he was trying to find a moment but God is angry at the Jewish people, and that moment he can curse them and it would take effect. But he couldn't find such a moment. I guess God was not angry at the Jewish people. So he told Balak, we got to get God angry at the Jewish people, then you'll be successful. What should you do? Get the Jewish people to sin and become promiscuous. What does Balak do? He does exactly that. He sends in to the Jewish camp women of Moab, the Moabite women, and they seduce the Jewish men. I mean, this is just unbelievable when you think about it. They just infiltrate the Jewish camp with their idols, and they seduce the men, and the men now, want to do the, sin. So before they sin, they tell them, but in order, with the condition that you bow to the idol and so on. So they got them to do two terrible sins. One was to cohabit with non-Jewish women, and the second sin was equally bad or even worse, is to worship the idol of Pa'ir, that their famous idol. Imagine God that did not sit well with God, and in fact, a plague broke out, and Jewish people dying like flies. 24,000 Jews died in the plague. That's a lot of people. But what happened was even worse. At one point, there's one man that took this beyond. He went and crossed an even greater line. And this was actually a leader among the Jewish people, a leader of the tribe of Shimon, which we read about in the Torah earlier, that he was one of the leaders. He brought the sacrifices on their behalf. He was a great man. But he, I guess, had this weakness, and he took a Midianite woman, and he took her and cohabited with her in public. Meaning he went to Moshe, and he challenged Moses with this woman. He said, am I allowed to be with this woman? Moshe said, of course not. She's not a Jewish woman. So he mocked Moses. He said, who allowed you to marry the Midianite woman that you married? Zipporah. She was the daughter of Midian. And what he did was, after he made that mockery, he goes into the tent and cohabits with her, and this was no secret. This was like a public display. I mean, you imagine such a thing, and the people are watching this, and Moshe is silent, Aaron is silent, no one knows what to do. I mean, it's like they're dumbfounded. It's like they're stunned. It's so overwhelming that no one knew what to do. And this is where Pinchas comes into the picture. The Gemara says that the Torah says that Pinchas he was so enraged at what he saw. He went to Moses and told him, Moses, didn't you teach us that if a man cohabits with a non-Jewish woman, the zealots can strike him dead? You're the one that taught us this lesson. So Moshe tells him, you brought that, you remember the law, go do it. And he does it. He goes into the camp, into the tent, he takes a spear, and he pierces both of them, straight through both of them, and he carries them out. I don't know how he did it. It's a miracle that he was able to carry two bodies with a spear into the outside to show everyone that they were actually cohabiting. This was if you think about the imagery, it's just unbelievable. This is and it says that God was so. He did it to protect the honor of Hashem, the honor of Moshe, the honor of God, and he was a zealot. He acted in a zealous way, and he killed both the man and the woman in the public, and God rewarded him in this week's portion, where God tells him, as a result of your great deed, you calmed my anger, and the plague stopped because of him. It was a great thing that he did, and God rewarded him. What was the reward? That he made him a kohen. He made him a priest. For him and his descendants forever became priests. That in a nutshell is the story. Now, this act, the Rebbe in this sikha that I want to teach you now, is going to make a comparison between Pinchas and the previous Rebbe. And as we said, the previous Rebbe himself writes that most of his things that happened, the big things that happened in his life, are hinted, and not more than hinted, in the portion of Pinchas and in Pinchas's life. What's the great act that happened that, Pinchas is this act that he did here in these portions. That he killed Cosby and he killed he killed these two people. Now, what he did is, you have to understand, what he did was an interesting thing. This is a unique law. What Pinchas did was unique. What's the law regarding the someone who cohabits with a non-Jewish woman? The zealots may kill him. But if the zealot came and asked the Bezdin, the rabbinic court came and knocked on the Bezdin and asked him, I see a person now who's cohabiting, I know of a person who's cohabiting with a woman, and I want to kill him. Should I go do it? What do you think the Bezdin is going to tell him? The Bezdin will say no. In other words, it's one of those things that if you ask, you're told no. If you do it on your own, if you feel, if you have that urge, and you have that vengeance, and you have that commitment, and you do it, it's good. But if you're asking questions, then you can't do it. Now, I want to go a step further. The Talmud says, the Gemara says, that when Pinchas did this, he was terribly, terribly ridiculed. The sages wanted to excommunicate him. The sages in Moshe's time. I don't know who they were, maybe the Sanhedrin, the other 70 sages that were with Moses that the Torah tells us. But the sages wanted to excommunicate Pinchas for what he did. They didn't think it was, what is this? You go and kill? It's an act of, the vigilante. It's when Jewish people don't do that. So they thought that this was terrible. Until a heavenly voice came and said, Pinchas is my man. It's okay. In other words, from the Torah's perspective, the sages were very unhappy with him. They were very unhappy with him. From the strict letter of the law, they thought he did something against the Torah. In fact, if he would have asked questions, he would have been told no. In other words, it's the type of deed that has to come completely from the person doing it. It's his decision whether to do it or not. It's a very fascinating concept. Mm-hmm. That means the Torah would not instruct you to do this. In fact, from the Torah's perspective and point of view, logically, from the logic of Torah, this is against the law. And that's why the rabbis were upset with him. Until God had to confirm that he did the right thing through a heavenly voice. So there you have the story of Pinchas. The problem is, this is not when you talk about the previous Rebbe, its connection to the Parsha of Pinchas, what's the story of the previous Rebbe? The previous Rebbe is the same thing. What was his act? The previous Rebbe, in 1927, up to that point, with the story with these 9 Hasidim, and his own act of heroism, when you look at it, what did he actually give up his life for? I want you to understand the facts. The facts were as follows. The Bolsheviks and the Jewish, you have a section, the Jewish section of the Communist Party, which were the most ruthless of all of them. If the previous Rebbe would have just sat in his library, sat and learned, and acted in his own as a religious Jew, no one would have bothered him. They didn't really care. He'll finish his years, The main thing what they wanted was to uproot Judaism for the next generation, get rid of it. The Jews that are already religious for 50 years, they didn't bother with them. You want to read, you want to continue doing your thing, do your thing, don't bother anyone. If you're not bothering anyone, you're not promoting it, we won't bother you. So what did the previous Rebbe give up his life for? Not for his own Judaism, that would have been okay, he could have done it. It was because he wanted to reach out and teach little children. The Rebbe says in this, I think here, in this sikh, he says that if he would have taught they're just older people, also they wouldn't have bothered him too much. Because the older people, again, they're old, they're not, so they'll move on, and but if there's no children learning, there's that the end of Judaism. It's the way it is, obviously. If you don't, educate the next generation, it comes to an end. So what was his fight for? To teach Jewish children. What was he teaching Jewish children? What do you think he teach Jewish children? Aleph Beis. The Hebrew alphabet, how to make, Meidani, simple things. Now I ask you, if you open up the whole code of Jewish law, the whole Talmud, and I challenge you, find me anywhere in the Talmud or in the code of Jewish law where it says that a person is obligated to give up his life to teach a kid Aleph Beis. You can't find it. You can't find it. In fact, there's only 3 mitzvahs for which you have to give up your life. We all know those 3 mitzvahs. One is idolatry, one is adultery, and one is murder. For those 3 sins, you're not allowed to violate, even if it means giving up your life. But everything else, you're allowed to eat on Yom Kippur, you're allowed to eat treif, you're allowed to violate the Shabbos. In fact, you're supposed to violate the Shabbos, and you're supposed to eat on Yom Kippur to save a life. Certainly, teaching a little boy at 5 years old Aleph Beis is certainly not one of the mitzvahs you have to give up your life. Yet the previous Rebbe not only gave up his own life, he gave up everyone's life. He didn't give up. He encouraged this self-sacrifice. And he didn't just encourage it. It actually happened. Many of the Chassidim that went to open up a school for Jewish children, and the communists caught them and imprisoned them, sent them to Siberia. A day later, the previous Rebbe would send someone else. And this went on and on. Countless Hasidim never returned. We don't know what happened to them. Some of them were shot dead outright. And we're not talking about 2,000 years ago. We're talking about people that their children are alive today. Mm-hmm. By the dozens, by the hundreds. So what is this? And the interesting thing is that many of the sages of at that time in the 20s, the 1920s, were very were questioning the very act of Mesiras Nefesh of the previous Rebbe. They felt there was no reason for it. They felt that he was, there's no obligation in the Torah to do this. So protect your life. Your life comes first. Yet the previous Rebbe went like a lion stood up against Stalin, and he sacrificed his own life, and then the Chassidim sacrificed their lives with his encouragement to save Judaism. And he was just as ridiculed as was Pinchas in his day. So here we see the connection between the two. An obvious connection. No?
Yeah.
An obvious connection between the two. The Rebbe asks her an interesting question. The answer, in a way, is the question seems like a little the Rebbe's. It's nuanced. In other words, the question is as follows: where is the story of Pinchas and his great zealotry? In the portion of Pinchas or in the portion of Balak? Where is the story of him killing that individual? Is it in this portion of Pinchas or in last week's portion of Bullock?
Last week's portion.
It's in last week's portion of Bullock. The act of zealotry, the act of Mesiras Nefesh on Pinchas' part, was recorded in the portion of Bullock, not in the portion of Pinchas. So and the previous Rebbe's connection to Pinchas is that act of zealotry, that act of Mesiras Nefesh. So it would seem that the previous Rebbe's connection to Pinchas is more the way he's in the portion of Bullock than the way he's in the portion of Pinchas. The portion of Pinchas is not so much about his Mesiras Nefesh. You follow the question? Sounds like a little bit, nuance, big deal. Pinchas is Pinchas. There's one man with it. Bullock, Pinchas. But here comes the interesting answer. The Rebbe points out as follows. What was Pinchas' reward for his Mesiras Nefesh?
Became
a priest.
Hashem made him a priest. Okay. You have to analyze this reward. This is a very interesting reward. What does it mean you make someone a priest? But before we analyze the reward, I want to analyze the act for which he got this reward. I began before, but I want to elaborate a little more now. This relates to a very fundamental Hasidic idea, which explains as follows. In the hierarchy, for lack of a better word, spiritual levels, the Jewish people are rooted in Hashem's essence even deeper than the Torah. Did you know that? The Jewish people are higher than Torah. Torah is pretty high. Torah is godliness. Mm-hmm. Torah is the wisdom of God. The Jewish people, the neshama of a Yid, is even rooted higher than the Torah itself. Within Hashem's reality, a Yid is deeper than the Torah. What came first, the Torah or the Jewish people? Torah. Did it?
No.
Look what it says in the
Abraham.
Torah. Talk to the Jewish people. Right. That means the Jewish people come before the Torah.
Yeah.
Because the Jewish people precede the Torah. Okay, now, from the logic of Torah, what's Torah? Torah is God's wisdom. From that perspective, from God's wisdom, are you supposed to kill this zealot? I'm sorry, this person that is cohabiting with this woman?
No.
No. If you would ask, a question to a rabbi, he would say no. In fact, they're told that the rabbis of his very day were so upset with him that they wanted to excommunicate him. I mentioned it earlier. That means that from the perspective of the Chochmah, of the Torah's wisdom, the logic of Torah, this is an unworthy act. It goes against the logic of Torah. But Hashem is happy with him. Why? It transcends the logic of Torah. Where does this act come from? That means like this. Pinchas, I want you to appreciate this. Pinchas is not only sacrificing his life. They were almost going to kill him. Mm-hmm. It said that the people wanted to kill him at the time. They took revenge. What do you mean? You're killing a leader. The tribe of Shimon wanted to kill him. They killed his leader. He killed their leader. So he put his life on the line. But not only did he put his life on the line, he actually put his soul on the line. Because his soul went against the Torah. He put his spiritual life on the line. Because in a sense, he's going against the spirit, the law of the Torah, in a sense. Mm-hmm. Where does the heroism come from? To be able to put not only your life on the line, but your spiritual life on the line. To Pinchas, his body was not an important thing. His life was not as important as his soul. So if you put his life on the line, you could say, okay, he's a holy man, he's a very holy man. But he's putting his neshama on the line. Now where does that come from? That comes from the essence of his neshama. If your essence is not on fire, you're not capable of doing such a thing. And only the essence could produce such an act and such sacrifice. The essence is higher than Torah. The essence of your neshama runs deep. deeper than even Torah. And therefore, from the essence perspective, you can even do a thing that seems to be against the logic of Torah. Because if they would ask him, if they would ask him, they'd say no. Not only that, after he did it, they also were upset at him. But nevertheless, he put his life on the line in order to protect the honor of Hashem and Moshe. That comes because his essence is alive. The essence goes beyond Torah. And therefore, from that perspective, you act in a different way.
How do you know when it's time to go against the Torah, like Rabbi Akiva, with the oral tradition? How do you know?
What's that? Rabbi Akiva went against the Torah when?
When he said, okay, we're going to write.
Oh, when you write that right down.
Wait. My question is this: How do you know?
What you're saying here is
how do you know when it's right? Is it only for self-preservation? Is that the test?
No, self-preservation
of the
Torah law. Oh, you're talking about
self-preservation.
So in that case, sometimes, but for that you already have to have. You have to be Rabbi Yehuda Nossi to know when you cannot every person.
Are these Israelis thinking of themselves as Pinchas?
Which Israelis?
The ones that killed the.
No.
You know what I'm saying?
That's not Pinchas. That's
no, I am not
Torah,
saying it's a comparison.
It's not a comparison at all.
No, I'm not sure. Are they thinking? I'm
just an innocent kid. What are you?
Didn't do anything.
I don't know.
Who
says he didn't do anything?
He's not known to have done anything. That's a completely different thing. You're comparing apples and oranges, or heaven and earth.
So the issue is you can go against Torah as long as you protect it.
It's not so simple.
No?
Let's not jump to conclusions.
All right. So
the point is,
when is the rule? When is the rule?
Okay, so it depends. Let's talk about Pinchas and the previous Rebbe, and then we'll talk about that. Previous Rebbe did the same thing.
Yeah.
Oh, wait a minute. How do we know? Oh, this is where it comes. How do we know that Pinchas acted from a point of view, from his essence that's beyond Torah? We see that from his reward. What was the reward that God gave him?
To become a high priest.
Become a Kohen. To make a person a Kohen is logically a Torah concept. It doesn't make any sense. The Torah says that the only way you're a priest is if your father's a priest.
Yeah.
That's the Torah system. That a person is a priest if his father is a priest. To make a person a priest if his father is not a priest, and to make his kids a priest, there should be a new line of priests out of the blue.
Yeah.
That's not a Torah concept. That comes from beyond. Only God can do that. In other words, the reward that he got is vindicated. It shows that the type of Mesiras Nefesh, self-sacrifice, that Pinchas had was the ultimate self-sacrifice of the essence of the neshama, which is beyond Torah, and therefore the reward was also from a place that comes from beyond Torah, something totally outlandish. Makes no sense from a Torah's perspective, from the point of view of Torah. Now,
so the reward came from God.
Yeah.
How do we know that was what God rewarded him with?
The Torah says it.
Because the Torah says it. That's the only proof.
The Torah says, that he became a Kohen.
How did he just become a priest?
That's the point. That from that day on, he was made a priest. God made a new thing. It defies the logic of Torah. Because his act was one that defied the logic of Torah, but it came from an even higher place. Sometimes you can defy the logic of Torah because it's coming from a lower place, and then it's a disaster. But if it's coming from a higher place, which is your neshama's essence, then God comes to identifies with you and gives you a reward from that same place, from a place that's even higher than Torah. Torah can never give a reward to someone like that because the Torah says it doesn't make sense. That's why the previous Rebbe said,
go against Torah, but
it only happens if you're coming from your essence of your neshama. That's what can only happen. It's not a question of going against Torah. No one wants to go against the Torah. You want to go. Sometimes you're.
But it really isn't going against the essence of the Torah because, it's for the.
Right. It turns out that it's not. You're right.
I mean, as long as you're preserving Judaism, that's what you're here for, right?
In this case, it was not about preserving Judaism. It was about preserving the honor of a
Hashem.
terrible, terrible disaster that was unfolding and happened right in front of the Jewish people that could have brought a
Actuality, it was within the law.
She was dying with
Well,
the
that's what I
plague
mean.
and everything.
Well,
But
it's not a good
it
thing.
wasn't his decision.
It was to protect the Jews more than the Judaism.
Really?
But let's move. Let me come now back to. That's why the previous Rebbe says that his Aveda, his deep connection to Pinchas is more in the portion of Pinchas than the portion of Bullock. Because it's the portion of Pinchas where it says the reward that tells us of what kind of Pinchas, act of Pinchas was, what happened over here. What kind of Mesiras Nefesh this was. What was the story of the Friedrich Rebbe? The same exact thing. Friedrich Rebbe did something that the Torah mandated? Absolutely not. In fact, other sages at the time were not in agreement with it. Totally not in agreement with it. They thought he went beyond, but it turns out he didn't at all go beyond. He did the right thing. In fact, once he was vindicated and he was released from prison, it became known that was the only way to actually preserve Yiddishkeit in Russia, and that became the modus operandi.
Yeah.
Everyone understood that that's the only way you can really preserve Judaism in that kind of situation. And the Rebbe points out that in this case is different than Pinchas. By Pinchas, after he finished his act,
It was done.
No, it wasn't done. Did that became the new modus operandi that people that cohabit with non-Jews,
That's what I mean.
the Torah
They
says
didn't
you should
kill
kill them?
anybody.
No, it's the same thing. If you asked the rabbi a year afterwards, should I do it? He would say no. It didn't become that didn't become the rule by the previous Rebbe. That became, everyone understood that became that his way is the only way to preserve Yiddishkeit in such circumstances. There was no other way it was going to happen. In fact, history tells it to us. How right he was. Because when you
Isn't that the number one way to serve God? Is to preserve Yiddishkeit?
100%, you're right. But the point is that even though some people at the time thought maybe he's overdoing it, there's a need, to send the best Chassidim into the front.
Yeah.
That was the only way.
Yeah.
And that's why the previous Rebbe did it. But where was it coming from? It wasn't coming from a logic of Torah. It was coming from the essence of his neshama. And the essence of his Chassidim's neshama. But that proved to be the true.
What does that mean, the
that was
essence
the
of
correct.
your soul? What does that mean? The essence of
The essence of your soul is that you're connected to God and there's no other option.
Okay.
There's just no other option.
Okay.
The idea that goes on the Mesiras Nefesh for Shabbos. I can't violate Shabbos, that's it. Like the Chassidim in Russia. They gave up their life to keep Shabbos. You say, but you don't have to give up your life to keep Shabbos. You can violate the Shabbos in order to preserve your life.
You must know.
Yeah, it depends where you're coming from. If you're functioning from a lower level of your soul, you're going to opt out. You're going to choose to prolong your life, to preserve your life, rather than violate Shabbos. But if your essence is revealed on fire, what is your essence?
Yeah.
Without Shabbos, I'm nothing. If I violate Shabbos, I'm over. If that's where you're coming from, it's okay. Then you're going to give up your life for Shabbos also. You're going to give up your life. It happens to be, by the way, that even halachically, could be that in that time, it was a fight against Judaism. The halacha is that if it's a fight against Judaism, to uproot Judaism, you have to give up your life in the simplest law as well. But that's besides the point, That's besides the point. The point is that the previous Rebbe was functioning from a place that goes even beyond, that runs even deeper than the logic of Torah. The essence of the neshama, which is rooted in the essence of God. When you're on that level, there's no way you can violate Shabbos. This is just not. You can't. You're unable to. You're unable to do it. It's like saving your life to give up your child's life. You can't do it. A normal mother can't do it. A normal father can't do such a thing. Violating Shabbat, if you're at that level, it's like this the same thing. The Torah doesn't demand that from everyone, because not everyone is at that level, and the Torah recognizes that not everyone is going to expect it to be at that level. But if you are, then there's no limit
It's
to
not a
your
question.
to your commitment. And here the previous Rebbe's name plays in, Yitzchak. Who was Yitzchak, the first Yitzchak? What was his life all about? Total self-sacrifice.
Mm-hmm.
What did he do? He went to the Akedah with his father. And it's not that he had a debate and he went to, and he made a decision. There's no debate, no questions. This is what God wants. I'm doing it. Maybe according to law he could have, gotten out of it. He could have argued with his father. God never told me anything.
Uh-huh.
He could have had that argument with his father. I'm not going. I'm 37 years old. I'm a big boy, and God never told me to sacrifice my life. If He told you that's your problem, I'm not letting you kill me. I don't have the mitzvah. Legally, he probably could have gotten out of it. From the Torah's logic, he could have walked away from it.
But he probably wanted it at that point.
That's a different story. Maybe he wanted it, maybe he didn't. Well, it doesn't make a difference. The point is that he didn't even ask questions. It wasn't a debate. Maybe I'm a liar. He wasn't. We're going to open up the books and see the Shulchan Aruch. The other rabbis in 1927 opened the books to find out if you have to, and they found a way out, and they all left Russia, and that's it.
Yeah.
I'm not complaining. I'm not judging. I'm just saying that those are the facts. It's not a question of, it's not so simple, it's easier to sit here in Weston in 2014, and sip coffee and talk about the self-sacrifice of the Jews of 1927 in Moscow and in wherever they were. So I'm not criticizing anyone. But when you're going to open up the books, when you're looking from a logical point of view, even a tautological point of view, you're not going to end up giving up your life. If you're going to ask questions, they're going to tell you no. Mm-hmm. Pinchas didn't ask questions. The previous Rebbe didn't ask questions. Yitzchak didn't ask questions. When you ask questions, the answer is no. You understand? And that's the root. And that's how it is.
Does that have anything to do with premeditation? In other words, if you're asking questions, it's already you're debating, you're premeditating.
It's exactly right.
As opposed to a
when
passion.
You're asking questions, your essence is not the function.
Exactly.
People that ask questions are not. That's not coming from the essence. Right. The essence doesn't ask questions. When a mother has to save her child, she's not asking questions.
It's automatic.
There's no. You don't go to the professor to ask questions. Right. Psychologist. Should I do this or should I not? If you're doing that, you're not going to end up doing it. Exactly. Once you ask questions, you're not ready for the soul sacrifice.
Okay, I get that. That's good. Good answer.
So sacrifice usually comes spontaneous. It can't be any other way.
Right.
Now you're going to ask, legally, should you do it? If you're in the legal realm, you're already not in the realm of soul sacrifice anymore.
Got it.
So the rabbis of the time that left Russia, they couldn't withstand it. That's not a question of judgment. So they came out. They didn't understand it. Because they didn't understand what it means to function from a place of called the essence of the soul. It wasn't in the vernacular. It was Torah, there was Shulchan Aruch, and that's what guided them, and that's okay. But that didn't produce Mesiras Nefesh, because Mesiras Nefesh runs so deep, even deeper than Torah. The real Mesiras Nefesh, the deepest Mesiras Nefesh. There's a Torah Mesiras Nefesh also, the 3 laws. Mm-hmm. The 3 sins for which you have to give up your life is a Torah level of Mesiras Nefesh. Then there's a Mesiras Nefesh that's essential, a soul essence Mesiras Nefesh. That's deeper than Torah. That's the Mesiras Nefesh where the rabbis want to excommunicate you until God comes and says, no, he's right. I'm making him a Cain, even though according to Torah it makes no sense.
Why is adultery up there? I mean, I can understand idol worship, I can understand murder, but why adultery?
Incest, adultery, yeah, because that's a terrible violation.
But I mean, there are other terrible violations too. I mean, why does that make the top 3?
That's God's will. You probably explain it logically also.
You think?
What it leads to.
Yeah, it's a corruption of everything. It's a corruption of life itself.
The ultimate morality.
It's a corruption of life itself. Whatever. Let's not get into that now. But that's the Frierdiker Rebbe. That was Pinchas. And Now Yitzchak, we talked about Yitzchak, yeah? By Yitzchak it was the same self-sacrifice, just like by the previous Rebbe. Just like by Pinchas. What was the thread that connected these three? Let's start with Pinchas again. He gave up not only his life, he gave up his soul. It went against everything. But he wanted to protect everything. He wanted to protect the honor of Moshe. We see this more by the previous Rebbe and by Yitzchak. Let's talk about Yitzchak a minute. Yitzchak doesn't ask questions, right? He could have asked questions. You know the first question he could have asked?
Why me?
Dad, Father, you told me that God told you that the Jewish people are coming through me. God promised us the land of Israel. God promised us a whole future. And now you're telling me that the one Jew that's alive, that's going to bring an end to everything. It's going to bring an end to everything.
I never thought about that. That's interesting.
He could have asked that question. And if he would have asked that question, probably would have thrown the whole thing into limbo.
Right.
But he didn't ask that. He didn't ask that question. Meaning he was ready to give up his life, but not only his life, but his soul. The whole... What was Yitzchak and Avram's whole passion? Their whole spiritual destiny? Jewish people.
Judaism.
They were ready to give it all up. Just to do what Hashem wants. Serious nefesh to the ultimate degree. He's not only giving up his life, he's giving up his spiritual life. The Jewish people are he's putting on the altar, the whole future. Previous rabbis do the same thing. If you would have thought of it, if you would calculate what he did, they would have killed him, they would have killed the Chassidim, what would be left? Nothing. The whole thing would have went up in flames. Logically, you could have said, wait a minute. Calm down, don't fight. Lay low. Maybe things, blow over. In 15, 20 years, Stalin's gone, a whole new administration, a whole new life. You'll start back then. The Frierdiker Rebbe said no. His action put into question the whole future of Judaism in Russia. But it turns out that that's the action that saved Judaism in Russia. When you're coming from the essence, there's no questions. There's no other option. You fight to the last drop of blood. You give up everything. When you do that, God, you know what the response is? God makes you a Kain. God didn't make the previous Rebbe a Kain, but you know what he did do?
What?
He saved the whole Judaism in Russia. He made him win. He won this battle. A thing that defies human logic to the nth degree. It's mind-boggling that what we have witnessed and unfold in those 70 years. A broken man, with a few hundred chassidim, stood up to the mightiest power under the sun at the time. Ruthless you can't imagine. We all know what Stalin was, how many people he killed. He was ruthless I don't know if there ever was a man that was so ruthless like him in the history of the human being.
His buddy Hitler.
He was worse than Hitler in a way.
think he was?
I think he killed more people than Hitler.
How many people did he kill?
100 million.
I don't know about that. Is that much? Yeah.
Boy.
It's crazy. And this man with a few hundred sins stood up to him.
All in one
And he
generation.
won. Stalin today is nothing. The whole empire is gone. The previous Rebbe's Chassidim his Chassid under the Rebbe, of course the Rebbe took it to a whole new level. But the Lubavitcher Chassidim are running Judaism in Russia today. The Russian government is the greatest. These same guys, Putin. Who do you think Putin is?
He's a vicious.
He was a KGB, one of them. He becomes the greatest asset to the Jewish people in Russia. I mean, that's called making someone a Kain. I mean, this is called making someone a Kain. It's so mind-boggling. It defies every kind of logic you can imagine, even Torah logic. That the very Putin, the very government that was the biggest anti-Jewish force in the world, became the greatest force for good in the world. It's unbelievable. We still don't even begin to appreciate this miracle called the Soviet Union. or the dismantling of the Soviet Union, and the incredible flame of Yiddishkeit that just went out of control in a good way, where the very forces that fought and shot Jews are now helping us, aiding, giving back synagogues and fighting that Jews should be able to have more and lifting, raising them to the highest levels of honor and so on and so forth. It is literally like making someone a Kain. It defies your logic in a way that's mind-boggling. It boggles the mind because the mind can't wrap itself around it. There's nothing to wrap it. It's so beyond the mind. It's so beyond logic. It's like making a Yid a Kain. It's like making an Israelite non-Kain into a Kain. That's the reward for this kind of Mesiras Nefesh. And that's what we're seeing now. All these things you read, these books, 20 years later, after the Rebbe's passing and his stalkers, what we're witnessing is nothing less than an unbelievable miracle. It's like when Moshe walked in the desert, and what was the first meeting he had with God? By that burning bush. What does it say over there? That he saw that the bush was burning, but it wasn't being consumed. 20 years later, the world is watching to see. This is the Rebbe's guy who passed away. He was a stalkus. The bush is burning, but it's not being consumed. The Rebbe continues to aspire to. He continues to lead the Jewish people 20 years later, as if he's the present leader. The whole world talks about him in present terms, in present tense. That's the reward for this kind of Mesiras Nefesh. You made a Kain. Meaning, the impossible happens. Something that even Torah doesn't. The logic of Torah doesn't even. It doesn't fit the logic of Torah. You're coming from a higher place. The Rebbe came from a higher place. His soul is the very essence of his soul, which inspired the essence of all our souls. Especially those Chassidim that really gave up their life in the literal sense. That's what kept the flame of Yiddishkeit alive in Russia and all over the world. That's the Rebbe. That's the previous Rebbe and the Rebbe. They're one essence.
I think you could say that you see today the non-Hasidic world is realizing today the greatness of the Rebbe.
Was it? That's a question. Today it's common. Today anyone that wants to, in the last 2 weeks with the Rebbe's Yahrzeit was observed the 20 years, the articles in every single paper. Anyone that wants to have some self-respect wanted to write an article about it.
Yeah.
It's a total transformation. But that's already beside the point. That's the level we're talking about. And that was revealed in the Parshas of Pinchas, where the reward is recorded. That tells us what last week's act was really all about. It was an act that came from a place that's beyond even Torah. And that's where the Frierdiker Rebbe came from. And that became unlike by Pinchas, where the law remains that you don't do it if you ask, by the previous Rebbe, that became the modus operandi. You want to really make Mesiras, you want to keep Judaism alive in such a place. That became the rule, not the exception to the rule. The previous Rebbe was a Nossi, was a leader. Pinchas was not. Pinchas was not Moshe Rebbe. The previous Rebbe was Moshe Rebbe. Have a good night. Thank you very much. The main thing we should learn a lesson from Yud Beis and Yud Gimel Tammuz. The Rebbe and the previous Rebbe, which changed the world, literally changed the world. But for that you need to have self-sacrifice. You can't just, cruise along, put yourself on cruise control. That's not going to get you far. You may not get a ticket, but it ain't going to go there. Have a good night.